Hello, my name is Eduardo Rojas, and this is my Pecha Kucha presentation on my experiences in HCDE 313 Intro to User Research. This quarter was spent planning effective and ethical user research studies. This meant practicing different methodologies to understand my users' needs, pains, and desires, and learning to communicate my findings effectively. My research topic involved investigating the dietary behaviors of students at the University of Washington, Seattle. I wanted to learn what environmental and behavioral factors contributed to the poor dietary behaviors of college students. My motivation for this research was experiencing barriers to eating healthy on campus. I practiced 3 different methodologies: field studies, interviews, and a survey to investigate my topic. In the field studies, I observed the natural eating behaviors of students. In interviews, I learned detailed information on the food environment, and finally, through the survey, I validated implications from the previous methods. Bias was a common factor to consider when conducting each study. My concern was that my high knowledge of fitness and dietary behaviors would cause an over-exaggeration of the poor behaviors of students. The surveys and interviews were helpful to develop a better standard from which to interpret findings. As a researcher, I was ethically responsible for keeping my participants' identity and information anonymous. It was also important to establish trust with participants to receive honest information about their personal behaviors. This meant being transparent about the purpose of the study, the time commitment, and use of their information. When analyzing results, I realized that research studies require a lot of data to create concrete findings. With little data, some results had high standard deviations and were statistically insignificant. Although I was limited by the scope of this class project, this is a valuable lesson that I will consider for future research. From conducting fieldwork, I learned that most students have bad eating behaviors as indicated by the high prevalence of phone use, poor posture, and lack of spatial awareness. Students that ate in a group ate more mindfully than individuals on their phone, but socializing still distracted them from eating. Preparing a good code sheet for observable cues that relate to high-level questions was helpful. Having specific physical cues to look for helped me prioritize note-taking on relevant observations. This saved me a lot of time analyzing results because my notes for each participant were consistent. Although the code sheet was helpful, identifying psychological behaviors such as mindfulness was difficult to accomplish. Pure observations limited data collection to only physical cues of the body. For example, I can observe a person look at their food, but I must insinuate whether they are sensing it or not. In the interview study, my direction changed to include both food environment and student behaviors. The greater scope of the study created an information overload that complicated analysis. But in the end, it was a good decision since it focused on the 2 core factors of dietary behavior. I completely underestimated the time it took to analyze the interview data. The process of transcribing, coding, and annotating the raw data was time-consuming. Also, the thematic analysis was challenging due to the overload of information and not having anyone to help sort and validate my decisions. Another takeaway from interviews is the importance of actively listening to the participants. When analyzing the data, there were multiple points where I needed further validation. One specific improvement would be to give more pauses after the participant answers, rather than acting on the pressure to direct the interview. The survey revealed that there are both behavioral and environmental factors that contribute to the poor dietary behavior of University of Washington students. I was happy that the data analysis nicely connected the field study and the interviews to create a solid framework for the whole investigation. I feel that my survey findings were successful largely due to the effort that I put into generating and iterating over the survey. I started with 4 high-level questions and 20 survey questions that I then started to take off as I scoped down the focus. I then validated my survey with 2 pilot tests. Looking back at the graphs that I generated, I feel like I could have done a better job at representing the data. For example, there was one case in which I used a bar graph to represent a trend, which should have been represented using a linear regression model. I also forgot to include sample sizes in the bar graphs. The process of writing the report was often frustrating due to the strict word limitations and section requirements. I frequently struggled with the results and discussion sections because I wanted to discuss the significance of the data in the results section rather than summarizing the significance in the discussion. On the bright side, I felt like my report writing improved with every study as I got used to the rubric. I also learned that the best way to write the results was to represent the data in a way that speaks for itself, thus reducing the need to explicitly state the significance in detail. My motivation for this study was to improve the health and well-being of University of Washington students. I will stay true to this goal by representing my findings to Housing and Food Services. I don't expect immediate change, but I hope to provide them with a helpful reference to realize where improvements can be made. In my future, I hope to gain more research experience, especially in complex problems that require a lot of depth. I feel confident about my key findings, but I felt like a smaller scope would provide clearer and actionable design recommendations. This would also make the experience more gratifying. In conclusion, I am glad to have gained so much knowledge about user research through practicing different methodologies and analyzing results. This new skill set will be an invaluable tool towards investigating problems as a user experience designer. Lastly, thank you to my instructors, Sarah and Nicole, for their guidance and support.